Welcome to Study Isaiah, the podcast where we examine the language, context, and meaning of the book of Isaiah with Dr. Paul Wegner. I'm Tyler Sanders, and with me is Dr. Wegner. He's going to tell us the Hebrew word of the day.
Oh, yes. We're ready for it?
Yeah.
All right. Today, our word is pride. And there's not a lot of detail that I can add to it, but what's important is that this seems to be Israel's major problem at this time. They're so proud that they can do it on their own that they're not asking for God's help, and that's got them in a real trouble. So it's Isaiah 9:9 says, and all the people know it, that is Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, asserting in pride and arrogance of heart. I think that arrogance of heart really explains pride really well, too. So
Can you tell us how to pronounce it in Hebrew?
Ga'awa.
Ga'awa?
Yeah.
Ga'awa. Okay. Ga'awa. Well, that's a great word. Great word for the day, I think. So let's get caught up before we get into our passage, which is starting in chapter 9.
Yes.
9, verse 8, I believe. Why don't you give us a little bit of a recap of where we are historically?
Okay.
Yeah?
All right. Remember, Isaiah's not chronological. So what's going to happen is it's going to jump back and forth. And at the end of chapter 9, what we did is shot clear into the future. So where it was talking about this person that was going to sit on the seat of David and be bring peace and all that. Well, that shot clear into the future when Messiah is going to come back and set up his kingdom. But now we've gotten out of that, and we're in about 730, somewhere in there, where what's happening is that Israel is really, it's before 722 where the northern kingdom is taken off into captivity.
Okay.
So this is before that when they're disobeying God and going far into rebellion. But they think they don't need God anymore. So that's about where we are. So it's about 730, maybe a little before that, but it's before 722.
And is the clue there because it's before Israel is taken?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So in fact, if we look at verse 8, it says, the Lord sends a message against Jacob and it falls on Israel. So that's telling us the northern kingdom's still around.
Yeah.
So,
right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So historically, that's about where we are. That means we're looking forward to. We're past the Syro-Ephraimite War.
Okay.
Okay, because that's 732, 733, somewhere in there. We haven't got to 722 where Samaria is destroyed. We haven't gone to Sennacherib's attack yet in 701. So those we're still looking forward to, and we're about at that point.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And then can you also tell us where we are in the palistrophe?
Yeah, because what we've just done, if you remember, I told you that this was the most clear palistrophe in our book. It seems like you've got the Song of the Vineyard in chapter 5. You've got the Song of Thanksgiving at chapter 12.
Yeah,
those are our bookends. Yeah. Then we had our 6 woe oracles in chapter 5. Then the one uplifted hand oracle at the end of chapter 5. Then we had our Isaianic memoir, which we just got done with in our last podcast. And then this time we now are looking at 4 uplifted hand oracles, 1 woe oracle, and then our Song of Thanksgiving. So we're now working our way out of the palistrophe.
Right. And those are all, in certain ways, they're relating back to the previous pieces. So our uplifted hand oracle we went over at the end of chapter 5 is going to have something to do with our 4 uplifted hand oracles. Yeah.
Now, do you remember what an uplifted hand oracle was?
Actually, I was going to ask you to tell us that again.
Okay. So basically, it's the idea that God has already set some amount of punishment into their lives, but they didn't get it. That's where that pride and arrogance of heart is not let them see that God's been punishing them. So now what's going to happen is that God's got his hand lifted up. It's ready to come down again. So you've got, and in fact, it's pretty clear in this first uplifted hand oracle that that's what they're all about, that Israel's just being disobedient, and they're not getting that punishment is for them and that it's supposed to correct them. They don't get that. And so God's having to punish them more.
So an uplifted hand is kind of an imminent judgment is coming. A judgment is on the way.
Yeah.
And when that phrase comes up a lot in these, that's how we're really defining what it is.
Yeah, and I think
it's really in the text too.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that this is the only book that has them in it.
I think we did, yeah.
Yeah, so as far as I know, these are the only uplifted hand oracles there are, and they're in Isaiah.
The 5, basically.
Yeah.
The 1 in chapter 5 and the 4 in 9 chapters 9 and 10.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
should we look at them?
Yeah, let's get into the text.
All right.
Let's start off chapter 9, verse 8. That's our first uplifted hand oracle, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's look what it says. The Lord sends a message against Jacob, and it falls on Israel. I used to think those are two different people, but remember, Jacob is another name for Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? And all the people know it. That is Ephraim, the inhabitants of Samaria, exerting in pride and arrogance of heart. And okay, now this is we're gonna try to explain why why God's punishing them. It sounds like already they've received some punishment. Okay, look what it says. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with smooth stones. So they're basically saying, oh, we've received one punishment from God. But don't worry, we're going to come back stronger than ever.
Smooth stones would be a better material than
they'd
bricks
be work
or something.
stones, that have been smoothed by people that are making them really nice. Yeah. Okay. Then the second part, the sycamores have been cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. Cedars of Lebanon, almost for certain. Therefore, the Lord raises against them adversaries from Rezin and spurs their enemies on, the Arameans on the east and the Philistines on the west, and they devour Israel with gaping jaws. In spite of all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still stretched out.
Ready for more.
Yeah, did that make sense? So basically, he's bringing the Philistines coming in, the Arameans from the north, and both are attacking him. And in fact, by this time, it called him Ephraim. So that means that all that is left is the highlands of Ephraim to the northern kingdom.
Israel.
Yeah, that means everything else had been taken by the Arameans.
Samaria is capital. It's really referring to the city, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ephraim is the countryside.
Yeah,
maybe,
the area.
Kind of the broader borders.
Yep.
Okay. Well, then, so basically, they're getting the wrong message. They've misinterpreted the punishment, right?
Or could care less about the punishment.
They could care less.
Here, we've been punished, but we're going to come back
Something
stronger
bad has
than ever.
happened. Yeah, all these bad things happen, but we're gonna come back. Not we're going to humble ourselves.
So then God's response then is that I'm going to send more, right? Then my hand is up and ready to come down some more.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the first one. Second one is starting in verse 13. Yet the people do not turn back. So the people did not turn back to him who struck them, nor did they seek the Lord of hosts. So the Lord cuts off head and tail from Israel. So that actually helps us understand the uplifted hand oracle too. God sent some punishment. They didn't get it, so God's pouring out more.
Yeah.
So this is probably one of the best ones to help you know what it means.
See the form, kind of.
Yeah. Okay, so he cuts off head and tail from Israel, both palm branch and bulrush in a single day.
So that'd be palm. That's tall and short, I guess.
Yeah.
Bulrush is like it's kind of like what exactly is that?
Yeah,
it grows in the water.
Yeah,
kind of, right.
Yeah, anything that's like a reed or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. And it tells these are merisms. So
right.
Yeah. So that means the very highest and the very lowest, and everything in between.
Yeah.
So that and notice it was in a single day. So this happened quickly. Okay. All right. Then it explains who they are. The head is the elder, the honorable man. The prophet that teaches falsehood is its tail. I've always thought that. I don't think it's actually the tail. I think it's what the tail's connected to.
Yeah.
But that gives you some idea of what God thinks of false prophets.
Yeah,
He hates them.
Yeah.
And you can see why. They're so deceptive. Yeah. People think they're following God, and they're being led astray by these false prophets.
But it's still saying God is going to cut them off from the people.
Yeah.
Good or bad. Prophets are gone.
Yep.
And the honorable men, the leaders who were the head, they're gone too.
Because the idea is he's wiping them all out, basically.
Oh, right. Because we're still thinking merism, right?
Yep.
It's everything in between as well.
Yep. Okay. For those who guide the people are leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are brought to confusion. Therefore, the Lord does not take pleasure in their young men, nor does he have pity on their orphans nor their widows. See, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's been the opposite. Almost.
Yeah, you don't hardly. I think this is one of the few times you ever see this term like this, where God's not looking after the orphan and widows.
Right.
But that means they're so wicked that God is going to let them be punished.
It really
too.
is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting punished.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the next.
Yeah.
Really.
For every one of them is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth is speaking foolishness. In spite of all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is still stretched out. That gives you some clue how bad a condition they're in, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, ready for the third one?
Well, let me ask you something about
Okay.
this real quick. So each time we get to this, his hand is still stretched out. That's saying there's even more past what has been described, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
more coming.
It's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so verse 18 is our third one. Okay. For the wicked burns like fire and consumes briars and thorns. It even sets the thickets of the forest aflame. For the fury of the Lord of hosts in the land is burned up, and the people are like fuel for fire. No man spares his brother. They slice off what is on the right hand, but still they are hungry. They eat what is on the left, but they are not satisfied. Each one of them eats the flesh of his own arm. Isn't it, that almost sounds like cannibalism.
Yeah.
But I think what it's just getting at is, here's Ephraim and Manasseh. They're both Israel's tribes, and they're fighting against each other. So it's like they're eating themselves up because they're destroying each other.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Manasseh devours Ephraim, and Ephraim Manasseh, and together they are against Judah. So that was part of God's punishment. Part of the punishment is that inner fighting and then going against Judah too. So that's
As punishment to Judah as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. In spite of all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still stretched out. So even now, they're eating each other alive. Still not done.
Yeah.
It's sad that they're to a point that they don't get it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
well, let's read the last one. I've got a question about I'll ask it whenever we finish this fourth one.
Okay. Now, 10:1 is not part of the woe oracle, even though it starts with woe. When you get to verse 4, you know that, but at first you might think, oh, this is a woe oracle. Yeah. Okay. Woe to those who enact evil statutes and those who are constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice and to rob the poor of my people of their rights. So the widows may be their spoil, and they may plunder the orphans. So here, the people are getting it. They're taking it out on the orphans and widow because they're the easiest ones to get.
Taking advantage of the most vulnerable.
Yeah. And now what will you do in the day of punishment, in the day of devastation that will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? Nothing remains but to crouch among the captives or fall among the slain. So you got two bad choices.
Yeah.
Neither of them are very good.
Yeah.
Okay. In spite of all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still stretched out. So if that's right, and that means that we're at verse 4, and it's still an uplifted hand oracle, that probably means the woe in the next section is actually more part of the punishment. And I think that's what we're going to find out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they fit into each other.
Yeah, they fit in. I think I may have been leaning more towards really understanding this as more deeply connected just to the previous uplifted hand oracle, but really these four uplifted hand oracles are also deeply connected into the following woe oracle.
Yeah.
It's a complex
relationship.
Well, there's a lot of, I think it shows that this was a very crafted
I think so too.
book, though. I mean,
and even
there's a lot of interconnectedness.
Yeah, and even that you saw that structure where, where you've got this kind of a structure happening. That's got to be a well-crafted
it's
record.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So here's my question.
Okay.
So it seems like the first woe oracle is kind of against the nation
of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second one is more focused on people, which would still be the nation of Israel. Is there any distinction we need to recognize there? The third seems more focused on the tribes, maybe. Yeah. And then in the fourth one, it seems like it's the people who are taking advantage of widows and orphans. So that may be like the leaders or anything. Is there anything to that? Or you think in general these are they're all just fitting together and aiming at the people of Israel?
I think it's more that, but I think what's happening is that here's a punishment coming over them, another punishment coming over them, another. So it's just that every time that punishment comes, they keep getting lower and lower and lower. They're getting fewer and fewer people because they're being destroyed and punished more and more.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's happening. It's like 4 waves of punishment coming over them, it seems like.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's at least how I think it is happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's read the woe. The
All
woe
right.
oracle.
Now, here's
the real
where-
one, not the one
yeah,
that.
that's all right. That we thought was one.
Yeah,
If
the
you
false
look
start.
at 5, chapter 10, verse 5. Yeah. Woe to the Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. Now, at that point, he's now telling you God's using the Assyrians to punish his own nation. Right? So he's calling them a rod of his anger.
And that's kind of a metaphor that'll pop up a lot.
Yeah.
Where we'll see that kind of idea of Assyria as a rod.
Yeah.
A tool of punishment.
Yeah. All throughout this judgment, you'll see that.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I sent against a godless nation. Now, if you think about it, that godless nation is Israel, right?
Yeah.
So God sent Assyria against Israel. Okay.
And he describes it as godless.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty... as their God, I mean, that's a stinging indictment.
Yeah. All right. And commissioned it against the people of my fury to capture booty and to seize plunder, to trample them down like mud in the streets. If that gives you some clue about how much freedom God gave the Assyrians to punish Israel. So bad that they could even be trampled down like mud in the streets.
Right.
But look at that next verse. Yet it, meaning Assyria, does not so intend, nor does it plan so in its heart, but rather its purpose is to destroy and cut off many nations. So God was willing to let Assyria punish Israel, but that's not what they want. They want to cut them off and make them no longer a people. Now remember, that's what the Assyrians did. When they took over a nation, they deported the leaders and stuff like that and then put their own in.
Yeah.
Do you remember? So what they're trying to do is to make it so that the people don't know that they're Jewish anymore.
Right.
And before long,
They're assimilate into culture.
And remember what happened to that's where the Samaritans came from, right?
Yeah.
Later in Jesus' day,
Yeah.
and how they were hated by the Jews because they were considered half-breeds.
Right.
So the Assyrians' goal was to intermix them in hopes make their country stronger because they're now one nation, but they're all mixed together. Well, but God can't let that happen, right? I mean, he's got to keep his people, and so he can't allow that to happen.
We're kind of seeing a distinction between God's purposes, Assyria's purposes.
Yeah.
Even though it's kind of the same actions. God is using Assyria in this way.
Yep.
But not to Assyrian efforts, I guess, or what their goals are.
Good.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yep. Okay. Yet it does not so intend nor plan it in its heart. So in its heart, rather its purpose is to destroy and cut off many nations. For it says, "Are not my princes all kings?"
That's Assyria again. Right?
Yeah. And notice when it says, so he's saying, "Wouldn't you rather be a prince in my army than a king in another nation we just trounced?" Yeah. All right. Is not carnal like Carchemish, and Hamath like Arpad, and Samaria like Damascus? So he's basically just going down all the cities that he's destroyed. So he's saying, they're all the same to me. I wipe out one country and one city. They're the same as another one. Yeah. As my hand reached to the kingdoms of the idols, whose graven images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria, shall I not do to Jerusalem and her images, just as I've done to Samaria and her idols? That actually tells us two things that are really important. First of all, the Assyrian doesn't understand. He thinks that if you've got a great God, you're going to have a lot of idols to glorify him.
Yeah.
In fact, remember, the reason Israel isn't supposed to have a whole lot of idols is because they're supposed to have no idols because they're supposed to serve God. All right, so he told them not to. But then it goes on to say, "Shall not I do to Jerusalem and her images as I've done to Samaria and her images?" And her idols. So that tells us that Jerusalem had set up false gods in their city.
Wow.
Yeah,
right.
So two things that I think are really important here that you just learned. Israel's gone a long ways into their own wickedness and even setting up idols and stuff like that.
Right.
But then I think the other thing that's really important is this Assyrian king doesn't get it. You can't blame him. He doesn't know that God told him that they're not supposed to make idols.
Well, like we just saw, it's all the same.
Yeah, in his mind.
Cities are their people.
Yeah.
They have their gods. but it doesn't. Nothing. None of those things have stopped me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's that pride and arrogance of heart popping up again, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So now look at verse 12. So it will be when the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the pomp of his haughtiness. So now God's challenging him and says, okay, when you're done working for me, now I'm going to punish you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think that work would be done? I mean, he says, when I'm finished with Jerusalem and my work at Jerusalem and that, I'll punish them. So what's the work in Jerusalem he wants to do?
Well, I would assume it'd be bringing them back to being people of God, right?
Okay.
It'd be like after the punishment works.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you're right. So the goal of God's punishment is that they'll come back to him.
Yeah.
So once he's done with that, then he's going to wipe out the Assyrians.
Yeah.
Or punish them. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. For he has said, by the power of my hand and by my wisdom I did this. For I have understanding. I've removed the boundaries of the people and plundered their treasures. And like a mighty man, I brought their inhabitants. And as my hand reached to the riches of the people like a nest, as one gathers abandoned eggs, I gathered the earth. And there was not one that flapped its wings or opened its beak or chirped. That gives you a little clue of his pride and arrogance of heart, right?
Yeah, because this is the king of Assyria.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's not true, because there's a lot of people that flapped their wings and did it, but
Right.
because he was so powerful, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He gets to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the next verse is, I think, God's sense of humor. Look what he says. Is the axe to boast itself over the one who chops with it?
Right.
Yeah. So he's saying,
We're back to the tool imagery.
Yeah. Here, you're just an axe in my hand. That would be like you coming after me.
Right.
And he says, that's a joke.
Yeah.
Or is the saw to exalt itself, or the one who wields it? That would be like a club wielding the one who lifted it, or like a rod lifting him who is not wood. There's God's sense of humor.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
These Assyrians think that they're something when they're only a tool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Therefore, the Lord of hosts will send a wasting disease among their stout warriors, and under his glory a flame will be kindled like a burning flame. And the light of Israel will become like a fire, and his Holy One a flame. So I don't know if you know the rest of the story, but in 701, remember, God wipes out the Assyrian army, and he calls it. Some of the passages say it's he sends an angel against them that wipes them out. Well, it's from these passages, it could have been some kind of plague that wipes them out, because it wipes them out real quickly, and it does a very thorough job.
Yeah.
So, and in Herodotus and some of those have records of sending field mice among them, and we know that bubonic plague travels by the germ being on field mice.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that God sent a wasting disease with some kind of plague.
Yeah.
And when it talks about under the glory, a fire will be kindled like a burning flame. Well, that sounds to me like a fever. So those kind of things I think would fit together pretty well for a plague.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Then it says, and the light of Israel will become a fire, and the Holy One a flame. Remember, the light of Israel and the Holy One a flame, those are God's images. So he's saying God's going to be the one that destroys them.
Right.
Okay? And it will burn and devour its thorns and briars in a single day.
And
Notice
single day again.
Yeah, and notice also thorns and briars. That's going to be a real common phrase.
Yeah.
Isaiah uses that for anything worthless.
Yeah.
And-
we talked about that in response.
Yeah.
In the vineyard, that it's till.
Yeah, you're close. I think it was in chapter 9 or 8 where I think it's actually 9 where it talks about the thorns and briars. We're going to see them again though too.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, it was probably 5 where we saw them last time.
It may have been.
Yeah. Okay, but it becomes a real common phrase to talk about worthlessness and how God's going to destroy them.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you were right. In chapter 5, where the vineyard, remember he says later on there's another passage that talks about the vineyard, and God says he's not going to let them burn up the thorns and the briars.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. That's it. That's it.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we're in verse 18. Yeah.
18, yeah.
He will devour the glory of the forest and his fruitful garden, both soul and body, and it will be as though a sick man wastes away. So that's why I think could be a plague kind of idea. And the rest of the trees of the forest will be so small in number that a child could write them down. So that means they're going to be pretty
Not very
thoroughly
many.
destroyed.
Not too many left.
Yeah. Does that all make sense? So here's God saying
so.
that I'm going to use you as a tool for now, but later on, I'm coming after you.
Yeah.
Okay? And 701 seems to fit that time frame really well. Okay? All right, now, the next section is really important too. Now, in that day, the remnant of Israel and those of the house of Jacob who have escaped will never rely on the one who struck them, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. So it's saying that one of these days, they will actually turn back to the Holy One of Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? So our question, will Israel ever obey?
Eventually.
Eventually. All right. And a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob to the mighty God. For though your people, O Israel, will be like the sand of the sea, only a remnant within them will return. So it's letting you know that the remnant's going to be pretty small too.
Yeah. And we've bumped into the remnant idea multiple times.
Yeah. A destruction is determined, overflowing with righteousness. For a complete destruction, when it is decreed, the Lord God of hosts will execute in the midst of the whole land. Therefore, thus says the Lord God of hosts, O my people who dwell in Zion, do not fear the Assyrian who strikes you with a rod and lifts up his staff against you the way Egypt did. Notice he's bringing that image of Egypt. Remember how they were treated as slaves there? And so he's saying, don't you worry about them. For in a very little while my indignation against you will be spent, and my anger will be directed at their destruction. The Lord God of hosts will arouse a scourge against him like the slaughter of Midian. Do you remember the slaughter of Midian and the rock of Orb? That's Gideon. Back in Gideon's time, the Midianites were destroyed at these two places. And remember, he's saying that it's not going to be by Gideon, though. It's going to be the one who was helping Gideon or God.
Yeah.
Okay. Because remember, at that time, he wipes them out with only 300 men.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So that gives you some clue. And his staff will be over the sea, and he will lift it up the way he did it in Egypt. Remember Moses holding the staff, and this water separates, and then when he brings it down, it comes together. Okay. So he's saying, I'll do it just like I did back then. Okay, so it will be in that day that his burden will be removed from your shoulders and the yoke from your neck, and the yoke will be broken because of fatness. That one's really hard to explain. So when in 701, when God destroyed the Assyrians, it means that Israel is going to prosper, but it didn't happen in 701. It was a lot further into the future. So as I understand these, that the author has got these two mountain peaks in his mind. One when the Assyrians are destroyed, and then one later on when God's going to bring his people back and bless them and all that. So I think it's remember we talked about what's called the prophetic perspective, and where the author can see two images and he puts them together even though he doesn't know how much time is between them. I think that's what's going on here. So he's seeing them both together even though there's going to be a lot of time between them.
And the fatness is the prosperity is referring to the return.
Well, if that might be part of it, but I think it's the idea of him blessing them and all that. So return will be part of that, but then also the future return will be even more of it. So I think once again he's looking into the future and sees all of them. Now it's fair for a prophet to do that, because if you think about it, God is showing him a lot of events that are going to happen. What he's not showing him is the timing, as how they're going to fit together. And so that they're not quite accurate in the time frame. It's okay, because he's seeing all these events. He's a prophet, so he sees all the things into the future.
Just that these things will happen.
And they're not going to all happen at the same time necessarily.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, the next part is a little harder. He's now just told us that God is going to restore them and all that. And now it talks about what looks like a trail from Aath, which is probably another name for Ai or maybe another city up there, because some of these cities we just don't even know anymore where they are. But some of them we do, like Milgram, Michmash, let me make sure I'll read it.
Yeah.
He will come against Aath. He has passed through Migron. At Michmash, he deposits his baggage. They have gone through the pass, saying, Geba will be our lodging place. Ramah is terrified, and Geba of Saul has fled away. Cry aloud and with your voice, O daughter of Gileam. Pay attention, Laisha, and wretched Anathoth. Madamah has fled. The inhabitants of Geba have sought refuge. Yet today he will halt at Nob, and he shakes his fist at the mountain of the daughters of Zion, the hill of Jerusalem. Now, let me tell you the end part there first. Nob is another name, is the name of a city on the mountain that looks over Jerusalem. Today, it's where Mount Scopus, it's another name for Mount Scopus, and that's where the Jerusalem University is, and it looks down on the old city.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that this Assyrian is standing up on top of the mountain, and it says he shakes his fist. I actually think instead of like this, like we usually think, I think it's more of a wiping them out, more like that. So it's some action being done with the hand. The Hebrew is not necessarily that clear. Yeah. But just like the Romans, when they would go like that against a city, it meant they were going to be wiped out.
It's a threat.
Yeah, and I think that's what this more means.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, these are cities that are north of Jerusalem, and then he gets to Nob and makes this gesture about wiping them out. Well, what is this? This did not happen in 701, because in 701 they came up from the south, southwest, up through that way.
Yeah.
So what is this? And scholars have had a heyday trying to figure out what this is. It's a visionary defeat of of Jerusalem, or it's all kinds of things. But what I think this is some. I need to tell you one other thing. It talks about them like Geba is a big fortified city. They don't go by that. It says they are terrified, but it sounds like, and they fled away, but it doesn't sound like they stopped there. So my understanding is that what this is it's people, reinforcements coming down from the Assyrian army that are going down to Jerusalem to help them on their attack in 701.
Okay.
Because it makes sense that Laish, after they and Laisha, those two cities that the two cities they destroyed right before they come into Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That after they did that, they were probably depleted in soldiers and food and stuff like
provisions,
that.
Everything. Yeah.
So I think what happened is that they're now going to need more, and so these are coming down from the north. Now that would make sense because they have what are called staging places out of the battle, out of the threat of battle, because you don't want your food and resources.
Your supply.
You don't want them destroyed or taken. So they put it up at a place called Ramah, and then they brought them down. And I think that's what this is. These are reinforcements coming down because they're getting ready to take Jerusalem.
Right.
But God's got a surprise for them.
Right.
That's the next part.
Yeah.
So verses 33 and 34. Behold, the Lord God of hosts will lop off the bough with a terrible crash. Also, those who are tall in stature will be cut down. Those who are lofty will be abased. He will cut down the thickets of the forest with an iron axe, and Lebanon will fall by the mighty one. There's actually a play on words here. Earlier, the Assyrian said he was the mighty one, and so it's the word. I believe it's the word adir, and this one I believe is the word abir. So they're a play on the words. The real mighty one is going to chop him off, but the Assyrian thought he was the mighty one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. The Hebrew actually helps us to know that there's a play on words here.
Yeah.
So does this make sense? So basically, big picture is the woe is that Assyria is going to come against Jerusalem, or actually probably more than just Jerusalem, because they did Syria also, or the northern kingdom also, right?
Yeah.
So they come against the northern kingdom, then go down into Judah, and my understanding is that God's allowing that all to happen because He's using them as a tool. But at a certain time, He says, "I'm done with that. and now you're going to be punished. And that's the picture of them being lopped off. Remember in chapter 2, it talked about all those mighty things that are going to be cut down.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it
Right.
was like everything that is tall, a tall tree, a high ship mast and stuff like that. They're all going to be brought down. Well, this is another image of that, of them going to be destroyed. And it fits really well here because the next section is going to be, look at chapter 11, then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse. So he's still using that tree imagery. So Assyria is going to be destroyed, but that little remnant is going to come back up from Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes sense. And to me, that what I think is so interesting, to me, what I think is real interesting is actually in verse 24, I think.
Oh, yeah.
When, it says, do not fear the Assyrian.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting concept because it's like, obviously they're supposed to fear God.
Yeah.
and you don't have to fear the tool. So like it's no matter how bad things get, like it's not up to the Assyrian king how bad things get. It's always up to God. There's almost a little bit of a pressure valve release built into it. It's kind of like if you start acting right, if you start behaving correctly, the punishment will end. Because this really isn't about Assyria coming down and taking over Israel. It's really about God punishing Israel.
Can I also, you brought up, I think, a really good point. Notice that God could stop the punishment at any point.
Yeah.
So that's telling us that God doesn't over-punish us. He knows exactly what it's going to take, and he only does it in increments. So if you're willing to turn around, he'll quit.
Yeah.
And there's where the pride and arrogance of heart comes in.
Yeah.
They're not willing to turn around.
That's right.
But he knows that, and so more punishment comes.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just wipe them out. He gives them more. And I actually see this as happening in our lives. God doesn't just destroy us because we sin once.
Yeah.
He's got ways of bringing that sin to light and then also working with us to try to work it out of our lives and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you still see too, like this isn't God favoring Assyria either. He hasn't abandoned Israel. Like, even though it's difficult, probably pretty bad, it's still because Israel is God's.
Yeah.
It's not Assyria. Assyria is just
A tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could have been anyone probably, like.
Babylonians later.
Yeah, right, yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're still in that part of the woe oracle.
Yeah.
But it's woe for Assyria. And even a little part of Israel, right? Because but then there's a restoration coming through. And look at chapter 11. Now, and you guys, this one's pretty famous. Most of you probably know about this one. But he's talking about now a king that's going to come, set up his rule in Israel, and it's going to be nothing like the kings before him.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the very least, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
But I like that the tree is chopped off, but
Yeah.
here comes that little sprig coming out through in Israel, or a shoot coming out.
Yeah.
Okay, the shoot will sprout from the stem of Jesse. Now, I've always wondered why it doesn't say from David, but I think it's telling us it precedes David. Remember, Jesse is his father, so I think it's saying no. This goes back before David.
Yeah.
So it's coming back even earlier.
Yeah.
And the branch from his roots will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and strength, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. He will. They often say this sevenfold Spirit here, and usually 7 is the number of completeness.
Yeah.
But if you see it, and that may be right, but it's Spirit of wisdom and understanding, of counsel and strength, the knowledge of the fear of the Lord. So you've got this guy being guided by God, and he's got tremendous wisdom and strength and power. Okay? He would delight in the fear of the Lord. So God's definitely guiding him. He will not judge by what his eyes see or make decisions by what his ears hear. See, that ought to tell you this is a special person. Because even human kings, the best we can do is what our eyes and ears tell us, right? And this one is going beyond that, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay? But with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with fairness the afflicted of the earth. And he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. So he doesn't have to it's just with his words he can,
that's
can
where the
punish
power
them.
is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's just telling us a little about his character. All right. He's righteous. He's got all this wisdom and all that. And he's it's not like any human being king or human king that's been around. It's this one's got special characteristics that no one else has.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that was his character. This is going to be, the next section is what his kingdom is going to be like. Okay. And the wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little boy will lead them. So you've got here two animals that are constant, in the world we live in, they're attacking each other.
Yeah.
And here they're laying down together and a little boy's leading them.
Yeah.
So it's certainly a time of peace.
Yeah.
And a cow and a bear will graze and their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of a cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand in a viper's nest. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea. That's a time we've never known.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to like the Garden of Eden, almost telling us that kind of peace and safety that was like before the fall.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to be like again.
Yeah.
So
even for snakes.
Yeah. Yep. I think that last phrase kind of sums everything else up. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. So what's this, my holy mountain? Well, whenever it talks about this future, it always talks about this connected with Mount Zion or Jerusalem or stuff like that. So somehow Jerusalem is going to be kind of the center of his kingdom, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so it always goes back to that area. Okay. But here's the neat thing. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea. Water gets everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think what that's saying, it's just so going to infiltrate the earth that it covers it. It's infiltrated. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that's neat. That's telling us that's quite a time.
It's a very different kind of kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they saw that too.
Yeah.
That's a kind of peace that they've never known.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, so what we've got there is that's kind of a summary of what this thing's going to be like. Now, it's going to go into more detail, but that's basically the structure that you're left with. This kingdom is going to be set up. It's going to be ruled by this guy who is an amazing wisdom and peaceful, righteous person.
Yeah.
And then these next couple of verses are going to add more information to that.
Okay.
So verse 10, then in that day, well, what day are we talking about? I assume it's the day that this king comes and sets up this rule.
Yeah.
Okay. In that day, the nations will resort to the root of Jesse, who will stand as a signal for the people, and his resting place will be glorious. So my understanding is that nations are going to come and want to serve this king that set up this amazing kingdom. So that's, I think, what verse 10 is telling us.
Yeah.
Verse 11, then it will happen again on that day. Okay, so talking about the same day, I assume, that the Lord will receive a second time with his hand a remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath. So the first time, okay, because this has a second time. So my understanding, now the first time shouldn't be the return from Egypt, right? Because that was only from one country. This says a second time from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush. So my understanding is that this is probably them returning from the exile. Because I don't know if you remember, but when the Israelites were sent to captivity, they actually, some of them were sent to, were sold off as slaves to other nations.
Sure.
So my guess is that the Israelites were scattered all over. And when they came back, they were allowed, I assume, because the Assyrian or the Persians allowed them all to go back. I understand, at least a variety, from whatever nation they served. And so I think that this second time then is going to be at the end when God returns again and he sets up his kingdom and he draws the remnant, his people, from all these other nations. So that's the second time. So the first time must be, I think, the return from Babylonian captivity when Cyrus did it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so the second time would be kind of the ultimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And even says, and from the islands of the sea. He will lift up a stand for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be cut off. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. Now remember, earlier we just heard how they were
they were going to be fighting.
Part of the
devouring each other.
Yeah, exactly. So the part of the punishment was them tearing each other apart.
Yeah.
Now part of the restoration is they're going to be pulling them together.
Yeah.
They will swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines on the west. They will plunder the sons of the east. They will possess Edom and Moab. Now, this is my background and my understanding of the future time. But I understand in the future that there aren't going to be wars and stuff like that. The eternal state.
Right.
Why would there be war? There's going to be righteous people. My understanding is that this must be the millennium time period where you still have God ruling over the nation, and other people are still out there that are rebelling against God, and at some point he destroys all them.
Okay.
So that's a little part of my background to help me understand
how this fits.
Where that or why we still got battles and fighting in this time frame.
Yeah.
Now that's not everybody's understanding of the future.
Yeah.
Some people don't believe there's a millennium, but my understanding of this passage suggests that that's the time where this is talking about. And then once again, the prophet probably sees millennium as this time when God is ruling, but then also the time behind it.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that he sees them both too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know how, off the top of your head, where maybe how people of other perspectives would interpret a verse like this?
Well, I assume they just see it as more like figurative, or the idea of there being no more war would be God's people being over all the other nations. So it's almost like a picture of them taking over all the lands. I assume.
That's why there'd be no more war.
Because they've already taken them over.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's interesting. That's an interesting detail, though.
Yeah, I think so.
Because we do have very clear peace.
I think somehow we have to. We have to fit it into how we understand Scripture.
Yeah.
Okay, verse 15. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with the scorching wind. The tongue of the Sea of Egypt, I understand that to be like the Persian Gulf, because if you see it from the air, it extends into that area. So if God wipes out that water or makes it so that they can pass through, now the remnant can come back to Israel real easily. And I think that's what this is getting at, is now the tongue of the Sea of Egypt and the river, the river either could be the Nile, or it could be, probably more likely, the Euphrates. So if that's true, then you've got God's remnant coming back from everywhere. And they have no hindrances because the water's not going to be an impediment for them. Okay. He will strike it into 7 streams and make men walk over dry shod. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant of his people who will be left, just as there was for Israel in the day that they came out of the land of Egypt. So it's interesting. Notice it doesn't say Babylon.
Yeah.
So it seems like to me that this is early. It's got to be before that happens. So it makes in my mind, makes a lot of sense that Isaiah has to be written before the Babylonian captivity. And even those who argue for a post-exilic kind of Isaiah, it seems like to me this rules that out, because you've got a picture of them coming from Assyria, not Babylon. So, which seems odd to me.
So is Assyria functioning more metaphorically here?
Maybe they'd have to argue
that.
Kind
of what you're saying?
If so, Egypt would also have to. But it seems like to me those are pretty specific countries. And I usually, my own hermeneutic is I try the literal first. If that doesn't work, then I'll go to the figurative. But it would seem like to me the literal works just fine here. Yeah. So if it's preceding the Babylonian captivity, the Assyrians were their major enemy. And through most of Isaiah's time, That would have been the enemy they were worried about. So it makes sense that would be the one he picks on or talks about.
Yeah, I think so.
So, all right, we've almost made it.
Yeah.
Now we're into this last section. Assyria will punish Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Assyria will then be punished, and then Assyria will be destroyed, but Israel will sprout back, and then the Messiah will lead him. So that's kind of summarizing that section.
That's the first time you said Messiah, I think.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. But that would be, I mean, that's a big question in Isaiah. Is, what exactly is messianic in here, you know? And this would be one that. Yeah.
I don't know of many people who don't see these as, at least 11. Even chapter 9, I think, is messianic, though not everybody does see them that way, but I do think 9 and 11 are. Yeah. I just don't see 7 as being messianic, but
I see.
I do see these two as.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, all right. That's a good overview of just the woe oracle, at least, right?
All right, so we've now got through uplifted, 4 of them, uplifted hand oracles, woe oracle, and then now our song of thanksgiving. And remember, they're matching each of the parts before the Isaianic memoir.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a short section.
Yeah. Well, once we've talked about that part, this just like mirrors it on the other side, and so it's easier to talk about. Though that woe oracle is a lot longer.
And then the first one.
And
there's 6.
And this woe oracle has the real woe is on Assyria because Israel turns out not only sprouting back but also having the Messiah lead.
Yeah.
All right. Now, in my mind, this song actually really is like praising God for everything He's done. All this stuff that He has just done in this is God's plan on how He's going to bring Israel back. And you saw it at the end of that woe oracle, how He's going to do. He's going to bring this Messiah to deliver them and then actually rule over them.
Yeah.
So so now the author can praise God for, and this chapter 12 is very similar has phrases very similar to other Thanksgiving psalms. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. Then you will say in that day. Now, what day are we talking about?
Well, the same one we just previously read about.
Exactly. So that one where God is restoring them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, for though you were angry with me, your anger is turned away and you comfort me. That's the only thing in this psalm that gives any hint that there was a punishment or something like that led to this.
Yeah.
Okay? So that gives us a little hint. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Doesn't that sound like a psalm? Yeah. Almost every one of those phrases are picked out of the Psalms.
Yeah.
Therefore, you will joyously draw water from the springs of salvation. I really like that. Springs are constant water moving up.
Fresh.
And it's saying springs of salvation. So that means a constant supply of salvation from God.
Yeah.
All right. And in that day you will say, give thanks to the Lord, call on His name, make known His deeds among the peoples, let them remember all His name is exalted. Now notice it says, in that day you will say, give thanks to the Lord, call upon His name, and let His deeds be made known among all the people. The idea is, now that God has delivered you, now tell all the nations about it, and they can see it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of neat, because here at the climax of this thing where they're praising God and telling how great this God is, they're saying, "Go look what He's done for His nation."
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and in 11:9. We know the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord.
Yeah.
As the waters cover the sea. So you're getting back to that water metaphor again, but it expands, you know.
Yeah. This is great. All right. Make known His deeds among the peoples. Make them remember His name is exalted. Praise the Lord in song, for He has done excellent things. Let this be known throughout the earth. Cry aloud and shout for joy, O inhabitants of Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. And see, at that point, they ought to be able to say, go look what He's done. Yeah. You can see how great this God is.
Yeah.
So if that, now we could have stopped the book right here, couldn't we? Because it's like a crescendo saying, look what God has done.
Yeah, the pieces arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just thought that's kind of how this section ends.
Yeah.
And now remember what we've done. I've told you that there's basically 3 times that you go through the book and it tells about God's plan. Each one of them gets more detailed and more detailed.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end now, and after we've seen what God can do, now they sing this song of praise to God.
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing in my mind.
Yeah.
And you're kind of at a conclusion because then the next thing starts a whole new section.
Yeah.
And even has a new introduction.
Yeah.
Which we'll look at.
Right.
So.
And this is a big section where
the next one coming. Yeah.
What is it? To 13 to 39?
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
And I'll try to show how, once again, there's I think a palistrophe that shows how the thing fits together.
Yeah.
And I try not to find these palistrophes all over, and yet this one in my mind was really clear, and I think the next one is actually going to be quite clear too. So the author's got to be somehow directing us to catch these, I think.
Yeah.
So at least I think so.
Okay. So for something that large,
yeah,
how do we prepare for that reading wise? Do we need to try to read all the way through 13 through 39?
I think I probably that's a lot. So I would probably say let's just start reading some of the oracles to the nations. So why don't we read that section? So that's 13 through 23. So if you could get that section read, because basically we're going to be able to move through that fairly quickly. There's just some things that I need to point out that highlight. But that section basically is judgments on the nations. And so why would you even have oracles to the nations in a book like Isaiah? And that's kind of funny because a lot of prophets have it, oracles to the nations. And why, God's more interested in Israel. Why has he got all these other nations that he's also going to judge or thing? Yeah. And I think the answer is because it's letting us know God's the God of the whole world, not just Israel.
Yeah. I mean, there's some concern we've seen in chapter 12 for sure, the nations at least knowing what God has done.
Yeah, and you saw that in 11 where that water covers, like the water covers.
So there's something there, but I think that'll be interesting to start getting into. And these oracles against the nations are organized by nation, essentially, right?
Yeah.
The first one I think is Babylon.
Babylon, yeah. And that's one of the longer ones too. And then some of the others are shorter, but it is a message to these nations. Now, it is interesting. Would these nations ever hear, this oracle? And it probably doesn't matter because in their mind, Israel needs to know also that he's God over everything, and he's got in fact, a lot of these nations have harmed Israel, and so they're being punished for harming Israel. Some of them.
Okay.
Yeah, Babylon is going to be one of the major ones.
Yeah. Okay. So for next week or next podcast, at least, whenever whoever's listening to this, you may want to give yourself a little bit of time.
There you go.
I wouldn't just power through these. At least not this one. We're going to go 13 to 23, Isaiah 13 to 23.
Yeah.
The oracles against the nations.
Yes.
And
or to the nations.
To the nations,
but against actually is pretty accurate too.
and probably we'll talk a little bit more about what the overall palistrophe maybe we're going to see a little bit.
Yeah, we got to see that. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And the question is how does it fit together? And that's where that palistrophe comes in, I think.
Okay, that's perfect.
Now, and it's the whole section from 13 to 39 is how I've tried to pull it together.
Okay,
because it's got a lot of things in it, and you wonder how did this all? Is he just jumping around from idea to idea? And I don't think it's quite that
random
jumping
or
around.
Something. Yeah.
I think there's a clear path, and I'll try to show you that next time.
Okay. Well, that's a lot to read.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in anything else we talked about today, I have one thing you may want to help people think about.
Okay.
Because you got a little bit into dispensationalism.
Oh yeah.
In a sense, right?
Yeah.
What for people who may be interested in thinking about that, or different perspectives on how things are going to go, eschatology, what are some good resources? Do you have any off the top of your head maybe that would be good intros for people who are starting to think about that?
Oh man, there's a book called Four Views of the Future or something like that that Zondervan put out. Yeah. That might be helpful. Or Four Views of the Millennium. That might be another idea because the millennium, not just dispensational people hold it, but a good branch of the evangelical church does not hold it. That
Sure,
there is-
yeah.
And yet, when you look at chapter 20, it seems pretty clear, of Revelation, it seems pretty clear that there is a 1,000-year reign. And so that's where this idea comes from, that it talks about a 1,000-year reign, and then afterwards Satan's going to be released and stuff like that. So that's in the book of Revelation. And I understand that book of Revelation can sometimes be figurative, and so the question is, okay, is it a literal 1,000 years, or is it just
a representative of something? Yeah.
My hermeneutic is you start with the literal. If that doesn't make sense, you go somewhere else. And so it seems like to me that 1,000 years is pretty clear. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be exactly 1,000 years, but it has to be a figure that 1,000 years makes sense about it.
Yeah.
And so I actually think there is a reign, and a reign of Christ that during that time, and there is some logic to why there would be one. In 1,000 years, there's going to be people that have grown up that have never really had any chance to rebel against God. So at the end, he gives them a chance to rebel, and it does make some sense in my mind. Yeah.
Okay, so the 4 views, that's a series, I think, right? There's a whole series of 4 views on all kinds of topics.
Yeah.
But that may be a good place to kind of start
it
digging
might be
in. This
helpful.
is I know it's a really dense subject. There's a lot that's been written on it, and that can probably be overwhelming. But that probably is a good place to
There's
start.
a guy named Ladd that wrote a book on, I can't remember the exact name, but it's got something about the coming kingdom or something like that. I think that is another a book that would actually explain pretty well how he understands the millennium and stuff like that. So that might be George Eldon Ladd, I believe his name is, and I think that's a good book to maybe explain that.
Okay.
So.
Well, it's a very interesting topic. So, well, in any other place we come across it in Isaiah, it'd probably be good to bring up, but it could also maybe be a good. Maybe we'll have to do a second podcast or something, and we'll bring in all the other faculty here at Gateway.
I have
we'll just
different views.
Yeah, we'll just duke it out, and really.
There we go.
See, that'd be great. Okay, well, thank you for your time today.
Yep.
We have
welcome.
plenty to read for next week. Again, Isaiah 13 through 23.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, make sure you do your homework, everyone, all of our listeners, and we'll catch up with you next time as we study Isaiah.